Alexander the Great had conquered nations. He had armies at his back. He had kings bowing to him, cities trembling before him, the world in his hands. And yet, when he stood before Diogenes, a beggar living in a barrel, he was the smaller man. He offered Diogenes anything he wanted: wealth, power, status, privilege. And Diogenes laughed. "Step aside," he said. "You're blocking my son." In that moment, Alexander's empire meant nothing. His armies meant nothing. His crown meant nothing. Because Diogenes carried something greater than all of it: freedom. And that is the Catharsian spirit, the refusal to kneel, the defiance that cannot be bought, the rage that mocks kings to their face. If you've ever carried fire so strong that power could not tempt you, you're a Catharsian. Claim it now. Join the Catharsians on Patreon from the link in the description box. Alexander was feared by millions, but he feared one thing: the man who needed nothing. Because you cannot bribe a man who rejects wealth. You cannot tempt a man who laughs at titles. You cannot control a man who refuses society itself. That's why Diogenes was freer than Alexander. And that's why your rejection of society has terrified people your whole life. Because they cannot control you. Because you need nothing they can offer. Because your fire makes their power look weak. Inside Diogenes' barrel, we turn rejection into power. If you've always been untemptable, this is your initiation. Enter Diogenes' barrel on Patreon. Find the link in the description box. Most people fear kings. They bow, they flatter, they kneel. But Diogenes mocked them. And that mockery was power. Because laughter shatters illusions. Because contempt destroys obedience. Because one word of truth can humiliate an empire. That's the Catharsian way. Not begging, not kneeling, but spitting on illusions and mocking the lies of the system. And you've done it too, haven't you? Every time you exposed hypocrisy, every time you laughed at mediocrity, every time you refused to kneel, that was Catharsian spirit burning through you. You've noticed it. People avoid you. People whisper about you. People mock you when they can't control you. Do you know why, though? Because you frighten them. Because your presence reminds them of their chains. Because your fire exposes their obedience. That's why they've punished you. That's why they've silenced you. That's why they've excluded you. Not because you were weak, but because you were Diogenes standing before Alexander, and they were terrified. If your whole life has felt like mocking kings simply by existing, it's proof you're chosen. Begin your discipline now. Join the Pythagorean Path on Patreon from the link in the description box. Diogenes wasn't polite, he wasn't quiet, he was filled with rage. Rage at hypocrisy, rage at lies, rage at the emptiness of power. And that rage gave him freedom, because rage refuses chains. Rage spits on illusions. Rage mocks kings. And you have felt it too. That fire in your chest when you see obedience, that disgust when you see placeholders bowing, that rage when you feel suffocated by mediocrity. That rage is your crown. That rage is your weapon. That rage is the Catharsian spirit burning in you. You are a Catharsian. You are Diogenes. If your rage refuses to die, it's because you were meant to wield it. Join the Catharsians now on Patreon and unlock your hidden, suppressed power. Alexander had armies, but he was chained by them. He had riches, but he was enslaved by them. He had a throne, but it was a prison. Diogenes had nothing, and that made him freer than any king. You've lived this too. You've walked away from jobs, families, systems, society itself, and people thought you were weird. But you are freer than they could ever be, because freedom doesn't come from crowns. Freedom comes from fire from within, and that fire is what you carry. If you know you've been freer than kings your entire life, it's because you're a Catharsian. Don't waste that fire. Join the Catharsians on Patreon now. Find the link in the description box. Imagine Alexander, the ruler of empires, the terror of nations, the man whose armies crushed kingdoms. And yet, when he stood before Diogenes, he envied him, because Alexander could conquer the world, but he couldn't conquer himself. He could command millions, but he couldn't command his own emptiness. He could own empires, but he couldn't own freedom. And Diogenes, homeless, exiled, mocked, was freer than he'd ever be. That's why Alexander said, if I were not Alexander, I would be Diogenes. Because deep down, even kings long for the freedom of the outsider. If you've been an outsider your whole life, if you've always felt different, misunderstood, you felt like you don't belong here, you are Diogenes. If the powerful have always envied your fire and mocked you, it's proof you carry Diogenes' crown. Claim it inside Diogenes' barrel on Patreon. Join now from the link in the description box. Society mocks what it can't control. It laughs at what it secretly envies. It ridicules what it wishes it could be. That's why they mocked Diogenes, not because he was weak, but because he was untouchable. And that's why they have mocked you. Every time you refused to obey, every time you chose your way, every time you rejected chains, every time you carried freedom they couldn't imagine. Their laughter was not truth, it was pure fear. Their mockery was not judgment, it was confession. Confession that you were freer than them. Confession that you carried what they never could. Confession that your fire humiliated their obedience. Every punishment you've endured has been proof of your freedom. Teachers punishing you for questioning, bosses punishing you for refusing silence, families punishing you for rejecting illusions. Those punishments were not signs of failure, they were medals, they were crowns, they were proof that you carried Diogenes' spirit in a world terrified of it. Because no one punishes mediocrity, only fire is punished. If you've been punished for being too free, it's because you're a Catharsian. Begin your journey now. Join the Catharsians on Patreon from the link in the description box. Diogenes didn't hide his rage, he carried in every word, every act, every laugh. And that rage wasn't madness, it was clarity. It wasn't arrogance, it was fire. It wasn't weakness, it was power. Because rage keeps you free. Rage refuses chains. Rage laughs at illusions. Rage mocks kings. And your rage has done the same. Every time you've burned at mediocrity, every time you've despised hypocrisy, every time you felt suffocated by silence, that rage is your compass. That rage is your crown. That rage is a Catharsian spirit roaring in you. Let it out. Let it free. Let your Catharsian fire live. Join the Catharsians now on Patreon from the link in the description box. Outsiders always feel alone because the crowd belongs to illusions and you never could. Diogenes walked the street of Athens, mocked, laughed at, ignored, but he carried a freedom kings envied. And you've walked the streets of your life, misunderstood, rejected, exiled, but you've carried the same fire. Your loneliness has never been weakness, it has always been proof. Proof that you don't belong to society, you don't belong to illusions, proof that you belong to fire, that you are a Catharsian leader. Think of the system. It buys people with money, it seduces them with approval, it chains them with fear. But you cannot be bought, you cannot be seduced, you cannot be chained. Because you've rejected society's crown, you've spat on its rules, you've mocked its illusions. That's why you've been feared. That's why you've been exiled. That's why you've been punished because you are Diogenes standing before Alexander, because you're a Catharsian leader. If you know you cannot be owned, you know you were born to rise. Join the Catharsians now on Patreon and unlock your hidden, suppressed power. Most people fear power. They kneel before kings. They beg for approval. They crave safety. But Diogenes mocked Alexander, and in that moment he proved the truth. Freedom is greater than empires. Because when you can laugh in the face of power, you are already freer than it. When you can mock crowns, you've already won. When you can spit on illusions, you've already broken them. That's the Catharsian spirit, not obedience, not compromise, but defiance, so sharp it humiliates kings. If you've ever laughed at power and felt fire in your chest, that's proof you're a Catharsian leader. Join the Catharsians now on Patreon from the link in the description box. Alexander had the throne, Diogenes had the barrel, and yet Diogenes was freer because thrones enslave, barrels liberate. Exile may look weak from the outside, but exile is proof that you refused chains, proof that you chose fire over poison, proof that you walked away from the world's illusions. That's why your exile has been so heavy, because it has been your crown all along. And one day, history won't remember the ones who mocked you, it will remember you that you refused. You've seen it in their eyes, the unease, the fear, the whispers, the disappointment, the despair, the unaliveness. It's not about what you've done, it's about what you are. Because your very existence mocks their obedience. Your survival humiliates their chains because your fire makes their power look pathetic. That's why they've punished you. That's why they've silenced you. That's why they've excluded you. Not because you were broken, but because you were untouchable. Because you are Diogenes. You are a Catharsian. If you've lived your whole life as proof that obedience is weak, then you're ready to wear your exile as a crown. Enter Diogenes Barrow on Patreon now from the link in the description box. Diogenes' laughter wasn't polite, it was rage turned into fire. And your laughter has been the same. Every time you've mocked mediocrity, you've burned chains. Every time you've despised hypocrisy, you've spit on illusions. Every time you've laughed at power, you've carried the Catharsian crown. Your rage is not shame. Your rage is not madness. It is your weapon. It is your crown. It is your fire. If your rage has always been too much for them to handle, it's because it was never meant to be silenced. It was sacred. It was meant to be wielded. Sharpen it inside the Catharsians on Patreon. Join now from the link in the description box. Alexander's empire fell. His armies dissolved. His power turned to dust. But Diogenes' laughter lives on because empires are temporary, thrones are fragile, crowns are meaningless, but fire lasts, freedom lasts. That's why you'll outlive the ones who punished you. That's why your fire will burn longer than their illusions. That's why your exile will echo louder than their applause. Because the Catharsian spirit cannot be erased. If you know you were born to leave a mark greater than any empire, then your place is inside the Aurelius Council. Join the Aurelius Council on Patreon now from the link in the description box. Now you stand where Diogenes stood. The world offers you chains disguised as crowns. It offers you poison disguised as safety. It offers you slavery disguised as belonging. Will you kneel before Alexander, or will you laugh in his face? Will you beg for approval, or will you reject it all? Will you drink the poison of obedience, or will you burn with fire? Because the choice is here. The sun is burning, the king is blocking it, and your only answer is step aside. Diogenes mocked Alexander, and in that laughter he was freer than any king. That's the Catharsian spirit. That's your spirit. Now it's time to weaponize it. Three paths stand before you. The Pythagorean path, where rage becomes discipline and mockery becomes fire sharpened into clarity. Diogenes' barrel, where exile becomes coronation and laughter at kings becomes proof of freedom. The Aurelius Council, where leaders are forged, where the Catharsian spirit becomes the throne of fire. You don't need their crowns. You don't need their poison. You don't need their chains. You only need fire. And you already carry it. Join the Catharsians today. Reject crowns. Burn with fire. Find the link in the description box and reclaim your hidden suppressed power.